When people talk about losing their home, they usually mean a roof, a porch, a door that won't shut right. They don't mean the way air changes when you're no longer welcome in your own walls. The night I was told to move into the stable, the sky was a pale bruise over the hills. The horses in the paddock were quiet, their breath rising like steam ghosts against the cold. My son stood on the porch, arms folded, his wife a step behind him, smiling that tight little smile that only ever showed up when she thought she'd won something. "Mom," he said, "it's just until we finish the renovations. You'll be comfortable. We fixed it up for you." Fixed it up. That's how people talk when they're rearranging someone's dignity and trying not to hear it break. I nodded, because when you reach a certain age, you learn that silence keeps you from saying things you can't unsay. I went inside, packed my sweaters, my teacup, my photographs. I didn't take the china or the jewelry, just the things that made noise when handled gently. The stable used to smell like cedar and hay when my husband ran the farm. He built it himself in the 70s, said every nail had our initials hammered into it. Now it smelled of paint and new carpet, an air freshener stuck to the wall pretending to be lavender, a bed, a lamp, a small table, a granny suite, my daughter-in-law called it, a fresh start. If you're listening and you've ever been politely erased, you'll understand how a compliment can sound like a curtain closing. She helped me unpack, moving my clothes into a small wardrobe that still smelled faintly of leather tack. She talked the whole time about tile samples, new furniture for their room, about how modern it would all look when finished. Every "it" was the house, my house, the one my husband and I built when our hands were steadier and our dreams louder. I watched her lips move, words fluttering like moths, and thought how easy it is for people to speak over someone they've already decided doesn't matter. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Rain began after midnight, soft at first, then steady. I could hear it hit the tin roof, the way it used to when we'd keep the mares inside during storms. I used to think the sound of rain on the stable roof was peace. That night, it sounded like applause for someone else's comfort. I lay there thinking of my husband, of how we used to fall asleep to this sound, his hand resting heavy over mine. He'd say, "If the roof holds, the heart will too." But the roof wasn't the problem anymore. The next morning, I walked to the house. The porch had new planters. The curtains in the kitchen were gone. Even the doormat had been replaced. My daughter-in-law met me at the door holding a coffee mug that said, "Home is where the heart is." "Morning," she said too brightly. "Let's keep the floors clean. We're refinishing." She meant my shoes. I looked down, saw the mud from the stable path, and stepped back. Her smile stayed the same, but her eyes thanked me for understanding my new border. I nodded, turned around, and walked back down the gravel. The horses watched me. I told them, quietly, "They think I'm too old to notice, but I still hear every hammer, every plan." Later that week, my son came by the stable with a clipboard. He talked about accounts, budgets, property taxes, said it's just easier if we consolidate everything into one family trust, less paperwork for you. I watched his mouth form the word trust and almost laughed. He said he'd handle everything, that I wouldn't have to worry. I smiled, nodded, and signed nothing. I told him I'd think about it. That phrase, "I'll think about it," has saved more mothers than prayers ever did.
If you're still listening, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to imagine lights across states, small screens glowing in kitchens, in cars, in rooms where someone else has been told to make do with less. Days became patterns. morning tea, feeding the horses, pretending not to see the contractors walking through my garden. They'd wave sometimes, kind enough, but I could hear them call her Mrs. Benton, my name, without hesitation. She'd let them, never corrected it. Why would she? She'd already moved into the house, into the name, into the life. At night, I wrote things down. Lists, mostly. Not of what I owned, of what they thought I didn't remember. The land deeds, the account numbers, the jewelry appraisal locked in my desk, the power of attorney still with my lawyer, not with them. They thought they'd taken my home. They forgot who signed the mortgage. One afternoon, I watched from the stable window as she threw a garden party on my lawn. Chairs, lanterns, laughter that didn't reach me. Someone was playing country music on a portable speaker. The song said something about roots and home. I smiled. Irony has good timing. The stable smelled like cedar again that evening. Not from memory, from me. I had opened one of the old chests, polished the beams, made the place my own. I hung my husband's hat above the lamp. I lit candles, brewed coffee strong enough to taste like resolve. If they thought they'd reduced me to a tenant, they'd never met the woman who built the foundation under their feet. If you've ever been underestimated, press the like button so I know you're here. Sometimes strength doesn't sound like shouting. Sometimes it's just the quiet sound of a key turning in your own lock. That night, I wrote one line in my notebook before bed. They moved me into the stable, but the stable still sits on my land. The horses rustled softly in their stalls. Rain tapped once more on the roof, and somewhere between those sounds, I heard my husband's voice again. Steady, amused, proud. He said, "Let them redecorate, Ruth. Just remember who pays the light bill." And that's when the idea began. A small, simple thought that would grow roots deeper than any renovation plan. If you're still here, stay close. I'll tell you what happened next. When kindness ended, and I began counting the money they thought I didn't have.
The first rule of silence is people mistake it for surrender. The second rule is they'll keep talking while you listen. And in their talking, they'll tell you everything you need to know. By the time the first frost arrived, they'd nearly finished the renovations. My house, their house, glowed with new light fixtures and expensive taste. My daughter-in-law had her kitchen of dreams, marble counters, pendant lamps, a refrigerator that probably whispered compliments. From my window in the stable, it looked like a stage set built on top of memory. She'd wave sometimes, holding a wine glass, her bracelets clinking like applause. I'd wave back with my teacup. Everyone plays their part. That winter, I began moving things, quietly, politely, legally. Every Thursday morning, I took the truck into town. They thought I was running errands, picking up feed, prescriptions, maybe seeing old friends. What I was really doing was paying visits to every place that still spelled my name correctly. The bank manager still remembered me from the years my husband and I funded the church restoration. He stood when I walked in, smiled the kind of smile people save for memory. "Mrs. Benton," he said, "it's been too long." I smiled. "It's time to simplify some accounts," he said. "Some things need to rest in safer hands." I didn't tell him those hands were mine, or that I'd spent the last month reading every document in my fireproof box until I knew them better than my own veins. By the end of that visit, I had new accounts, private, secure,
with quiet withdrawal set in motion. Not enough to sound alarms, just enough to start a new chapter's first line. If you're listening, tell me where you are. Are you in a kitchen that doesn't feel like yours anymore? Are you saving pieces of yourself the way I did, one quiet signature at a time? Write "I'm listening" in the comments. It helps to know who else still believes in the power of patience. My son stopped by one afternoon, clipboard again in hand. He spoke in gentle tones, the kind reserved for pets and elderly women they think are tired. "Mom," he said, "we're almost ready to refinance. It'll just be cleaner with one name on the deed." I smiled. "Whose name would that be?" He hesitated, the way people do when they hear their own echo. "Mine, temporarily, of course. You don't need the stress." I poured him coffee, strong and sweet, and let the silence stretch so long that even the clock held its breath. Then I said softly, "I've always thought stress keeps the heart young." He laughed awkwardly, changed the subject to football. When he left, he forgot the clipboard on the counter. I looked down at it. Draft documents, unsigned lines, his handwriting across my property. I read every word before I called him back. He never noticed the tiny mark I left on the corner of the page. A dot of ink, my own quiet signature of knowing. A week later, I went to see my lawyer. He's been with me 30 years, through the drought, the inheritance, the first mortgage, the last will. He looks older now, hair white as snowdrift, but his memory sharp. When I told him what they'd done, he didn't interrupt. He just listened, pen tapping once, twice, like a judge counting truths. When I finished, he said, "Do you want revenge or freedom?" I thought for a long moment, watching dust dance in a beam of window light. Then I said, "Whichever one buys peace." He smiled and opened a new file. We drew up new papers that afternoon, a trust that bore only one name, mine. A secondary transfer plan that would move everything, land, savings, stock, and even that jewelry collection my daughter-in-law admired, into a private charitable fund. "The moment they sign your name without permission," he said, "this will activate automatically." I thanked him, not with words, but with the relief that made my spine straight again. If you're still here, maybe give this story a little heart. Sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who's polite. In the evenings, I'd walk the pasture, wrap myself in my husband's old coat, and count the lights glowing in the house on the hill. My lights. Every bulb paid for by hands that no longer shook. They threw dinner parties now. Cars filled the drive. I could hear laughter spilling across the fields. I didn't hate them for it. I'd built a life meant to be lived loudly. I just wished they'd remembered who gave them the music. Then one night, after another party, my daughter-in-law came down to the stable. Her heels sank into the mud. Her perfume arrived before her voice. She stood at the door, blinking against the lantern light. "Just checking on you," she said. "Do you need anything?" I looked up from my notebook. "I'm fine." Her eyes flicked to the table, to the open folder of bank statements. She smiled too quickly. "Sorting bills?" "Sorting blessings," I said. She nodded, didn't ask what that meant. The next morning, she told my son that maybe I was getting confused, that perhaps it was time to talk about guardianship. He frowned, hesitated, but she was good at planting weeds in a clean garden.
I heard every word through the window. I also heard my lawyer's voice in my head. They'll think you're fading. Let them. That's when they tell the truth. So I smiled more, forgot small things on purpose, let them think the edges of me were softening. They never saw the letters I mailed every week, certified, time-stamped, careful. They never saw the safe deposit key in the lining of my coat. When tax season came, my son knocked on my door again, cheerful, clipboard in hand. "Mom, we'll need your signature this week. The accountant said it's urgent." I offered him tea again. He declined. He was in a hurry. I said, "Leave it with me. I'll look it over." He did, and as soon as he drove away, I slid the envelope into my drawer, then took a photograph of every page, each lie lit by morning sun. By the time he realized the forms were missing, they were already in my lawyer's office. That week, I moved the last of my accounts, every cent, quiet as snow falling on a closed gate. The house lights still glowed that night, but they were no longer mine. They were rented light, a borrowed glow on land that was slowly learning to listen to me again. If you've ever had to smile while someone underestimated you, write patience in the comments. It's a word I've come to love more than any hymn. That evening, I sat on the stable steps, listening to the horses breathe. The air smelled like hay and frost. I closed my notebook, and for the first time in months, I laughed. Quiet, low, sure. The paper trail was complete. The money had moved, and the storm that was coming would be theirs to weather. If you're still listening, stay with me. I'll tell you what happened when the renovations were finished, when they threw their housewarming party and discovered who actually owned the lights above their heads.
Spring came dressed like forgiveness, but I knew better. Kentucky light can be soft enough to make anything look honest, even liars, even thieves who call you Mom. By March, the renovations were finished. They called it a celebration, a new chapter. They sent invitations across the county, neighbors, bankers, the pastor's wife. They even printed my name at the bottom of the card, hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Benton, with special thanks to Mrs. Ruth Benton. Special thanks. That's what you give the caterer. I hung the card on the stable wall anyway. A reminder, a trophy for staying quiet. The day of the party, the sky was crystal clean after a night of rain. The air smelled of lilac and money. From my window, I watched them string fairy lights across the porch I built, the porch where my husband once rocked every evening with a glass of sweet tea. The music started early, laughing guests, clinking glasses, the hum of conversations about mortgages and vacations. None of them knew the woman in the stable had written the ending already. Before sunset, my son came down the path in his new jacket, the one that tried too hard to look casual. He knocked once and stepped in, smelling of cologne and success. "Mom, you're coming up, right? It wouldn't feel right without you." He said it kindly, but the kindness had scaffolding. It was there to hold up guilt. I smiled. "I'll come after the first toast." He looked relieved. "Good, they all want to see you." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And the banker's here. He helped us with the new loan." I nodded. Because my lawyer had already called that morning to tell me the final transfer was complete.
There were no new loans. There was no mortgage left to refinance. There was only a deed with one name, mine. When he left, I opened my trunk and took out the folder of documents, all crisp, notarized, stamped with fresh dates. A letter sat on top, addressed to him. I placed it in my purse. Outside, the first lights flickered on. The house glowed like a cathedral built from borrowed faith. I straightened my cardigan, tucked a yellow carnation behind my ear, and began the slow walk up the gravel path. If you're still listening, tell me in the comments what you would have done. Would you have shouted? Would you have left? Or would you have waited for the right silence to speak for you? When I stepped onto the porch, a few guests turned, surprised. Someone whispered, "She looks wonderful." My daughter-in-law swept toward me, all perfume and pearls. "Mother, you made it!" She kissed the air near my cheek. Come, let me show you what we've done." She led me through the house as though I were visiting a museum about my own life. Walls painted white, family photos rearranged, the smell of money covering every trace of history. "This is our dream home." She meant my dream, just with new curtains. I smiled. "It's beautiful." And it was. It truly was. I'd always believed beauty didn't erase truth. It just made it easier to look at. After the speeches, my son took the microphone. He thanked everyone, thanked his wife, and finally thanked me. "She's been the heart of this place for 50 years, he said. "We're just continuing what she and Dad started." People clapped. He raised his glass. "To family." "To foundations," I whispered. When the noise settled, I stepped forward. He looked startled, but handed me the microphone. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence gather, that heavy, expectant quiet I'd been saving for months. "Thank you," I said slowly, each word clear enough for the back row to hear. This house has meant everything to me. My husband built it. My children grew here. And tonight, I'm proud to say it will always stand on strong ground. I looked toward the banker, then back to my son. Because the land beneath it, I continued, was never for sale. A murmur rippled through the guests. My daughter-in-law's smile froze mid-photograph. I reached into my purse and handed the folded letter to my son. "It's from the lawyer. You might want to read it before the night ends." Then I raised my glass. To roots. To remembering who planted them.
The applause this time was polite, uncertain. A few guests smiled. Most watched for the next chapter in the drama. I didn't stay to give it to them. I walked down the porch steps, the gravel crunching like punctuation. Behind me, voices started to rise, confused, sharp. By the time I reached the stable, I could hear the screen door slam. Later that night, the banker's car headlights swept the pasture. He knocked softly on the stable door. "Mrs. Benton," he said, "your paperwork was delivered. I just wanted to confirm. You did indeed transfer the title this morning. I nodded. It's all yours to file. He hesitated. They seemed surprised. I smiled. They built a dream on land they didn't own. Surprise is the least they deserve. He tipped his hat, his face caught between admiration and pity, and left without another word. If you're still here, write "quiet justice" in the comments. It's a phrase that tastes like sweet tea and truth. In the morning, my son came down the hill. He didn't knock. He looked like a man who'd finally read the ending of a book he thought he'd written. "Mom," he said softly, "why didn't you tell me?" I set my cup down. "Would you have listened?" He looked away. His voice cracked once. "She's furious." I nodded. "She'll learn. Anger's just grief with lipstick." He almost laughed. Then he sat on the step beside me, same place he used to tie his shoes when he was 8. We sat in silence, listening to the horses breathe, listening to the house above us pretending to sleep. I didn't want his apology. I wanted his understanding. But understanding takes time, and time had finally come back to me. When he stood to leave, he said, "I didn't mean to push you out. I know. But meaning well is what most people say when they're holding the shovel." That night, I lit a candle on the table. The flame caught the reflection of the photograph beside it. Me and my husband standing in front of the same house, decades younger, eyes full of future. I whispered, "We built it, love. They decorated it. There's a difference." The candle crackled in agreement. If you've ever been told you're lucky to have a roof, remember this: you might also own the ground it stands on. Stay close. I'll tell you what happened next when I left the stable behind, not out of anger, but because I had one last thing to build before the music ended.
The morning after the party, the world was quieter. Even the horses seemed to know something had shifted. Their hooves clicked softly against the boards, slow and measured, like the sound of peace arriving. Up on the hill, my house, their house, was still. No music, no laughter, no engines, only the faint hum of an expensive refrigerator cooling other people's regrets. I made coffee, strong and black, the way my husband liked it. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the kettle breathe. When a woman has spent months being underestimated, silence tastes better than sugar. I didn't need to see the letter to know what it said. My lawyer had already read it to me line by line. The property was mine, fully and finally. The charitable fund was active. The house, the farm, and every cent attached to the land were now bound to a new name: the Benton Foundation for Rural Youth. They could live there. They could host their parties. They just couldn't sell what wasn't theirs anymore. My son didn't lose his home. He simply discovered it came with walls of humility. If you're still listening, tell me where you are tonight. Sometimes I like to picture faces lit by phone screens, people hearing the same kind of rain that's falling outside my window now. I spent the next few weeks turning the stables into something new. The old tack room became a small library, shelves made from leftover oak planks, filled with music books and ledgers. The feed room turned into a lesson space, one upright piano against the far wall, polished until the keys looked like a row of teeth smiling at redemption. I called it the Legacy Barn. Every afternoon, children from town would come by after school, hands dirty from chores, eyes bright with the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. We learned scales first, then stories. I taught them that a song can outlive anger, that rhythm is just forgiveness keeping time. One boy asked me, "Why do you teach here, Miss Ruth? It's just a barn." I smiled, because barns hold things worth keeping. Word spread. People started donating old instruments, fiddles missing strings, dented trumpets, even a banjo that still smelled like tobacco barns and summer sweat. We repaired them, played them, filled the rafters with sound. On Saturdays, my son would come by with tools, pretending to fix things. He didn't say much, but he stayed long enough to help lift heavy boxes and eat my biscuits. He'd glance at the piano sometimes.
And once, when he thought I wasn't looking, he wiped a speck of dust from the lid, like a small apology. If you've ever watched someone learn they can't buy forgiveness, click the heart on this story so I know you understand. By summer, the barn smelled of lemon oil and hope. We hosted our first recital in July. Parents sat on hay bales draped in quilts. The children played their hearts out, each wrong note a kind of bravery. When the applause ended, I stood and said, "This barn used to be a place for horses. Now it's a place for second chances. Both are meant to carry us somewhere." The crowd clapped softly. A few cried, and from the back, I saw my son standing near the door, hands in pockets, eyes wet, lips moving silently. "Thank you." After the recital, he walked me home. The porch light flickered on automatically. For once, it didn't look like theirs or mine, just light. Halfway up the steps, he stopped. "Mom," he said, "I read the trust papers. I know you did it for them, for the kids, for the town." I nodded. He swallowed hard. He said, I'm sorry for forgetting who built all this." I touched his sleeve. I said, "You didn't forget," I said. "You just needed to see it from the bottom of the hill." That night, I sat in my chair by the stable window. The moon hung low, white as paper. The horses shifted softly in their stalls. I could hear faint laughter drifting from the house. Not loud, not entitled, just human again. I opened my notebook and wrote the last entry. They moved me into the stable. I moved my money. And somehow, we all found a home we could live with. Then I closed it and let the quiet settle in around me. It was the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore, the kind that hums like a held note in the key of grace. If you're still here, stay a little longer. Maybe you've been pushed aside, or underestimated, or treated like a chapter that's already ended. But remember, the author is still you. You can always rewrite the ending. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.